June 25, 1966. Dean Martin stood in front of his mother's casket inside a tiny Catholic church in Steubenville, Ohio. His hands were shaking, his eyes were red, and in a few moments, he was going to do something he had promised her on her deathbed. He was going to sing, not on a stage in Las Vegas, not in front of millions on television, but here, in this small church where she had prayed every Sunday for 40 years, surrounded by the same Italian immigrants who had watched him grow up. Dean opened his mouth. He began to sing Ave Maria, and for the first verse, his voice held steady. That smooth, golden voice that had sold millions of records. That voice America fell in love with. But then something happened. On the second verse, his voice cracked. Not a small waver, a complete break, like something deep inside his chest had shattered into 1,000 pieces. He tried to keep going. He tried to push through. But the king of cool, the man who never showed emotion, the man who made everything look effortless, could not finish his mother's favorite hymn. He just stopped, frozen, tears streaming down his face, unable to keep the promise he had made to the woman who had believed in him before anyone else did. What happened in the next 60 seconds would change how Dean Martin understood music, faith, and family for the rest of his life. And the people who witnessed it that morning have never told the full story until now. If you have ever lost someone you loved more than life itself, this story is going to stay with you. So stay with me, and let me know in the comments where you are watching from today. Because what happened next in that church, nobody saw coming. The days leading up to that moment had been the darkest of Dean Martin's life. By 1966, Dean was untouchable. He had hit records. He had movies. He had his own television show watched by millions every week. He was a member of the Rat Pack, best friends with Frank Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr. He had money, fame, and the kind of cool that other men could only dream about. But none of that mattered when he got the phone call. His mother, Angela Crocetti, had collapsed at home in Steubenville. Her heart was failing. She had been sick for months, but she had hidden it from Dean. She did not want to worry him. She did not want to be a burden to her famous son. By the time Dean found out how serious it was almost too late. He canceled everything. He flew from Los Angeles to Ohio on the first available flight. But when he walked into that hospital room and saw his mother lying in that bed, looking so small, so fragile, the king of cool disappeared. In that moment, he was just Dino Crocetti again, the poor Italian kid from Steubenville who used to sing in the basement while his mother washed other people's clothes to keep food on the table. Angela held his hand. Her grip was weak, but her eyes were clear. "Dino," she whispered, "I need you to promise me something." Dean leaned closer. "Anything, Mama. Anything." What she asked him to do seemed simple, but it would turn out to be the hardest thing he had ever done in his life. On June 23, 1966, at 4:17 in the morning, Angela Crocetti passed away. She was 71 years old. When the nurse came to tell Dean, he did not cry. He did not scream. He just sat there, completely still, staring at the wall. Like if he did not move, if he did not breathe, maybe it would not be real. For the next 2 days, Dean barely spoke a word to anyone. He sat beside his mother's casket in the living room of his childhood home, holding her hand, whispering things that only he and she would ever know. But there was still that promise. And Dean Martin had never broken a promise to his mother. St. Anthony of Padua Church was a small, humble building on the south side of Steubenville. It was not fancy. It was not famous. But for the Italian immigrant families who had built it with their own hands back in 1912, it was the most sacred place on earth. This was Angela Crocetti's church. She had walked through those doors every single Sunday for over 40 years. She had lit candles for her children. She had prayed the rosary until her fingers were sore. She had sung in the choir with the other Italian women, their voices echoing off the old stone walls, filling the church with hymns from the old country. And there was one hymn Angela loved more than any other, Ave Maria. She used to sing it while she cooked. She used to hum it while she cleaned houses for wealthy families across town. And when Dean was just a little boy, before he was famous, before he changed his name, she used to sing it to him at night to help him fall asleep. In those final hours at the hospital, when Angela knew her time was running out, she had grabbed Dean's hand and made him promise. "Dino, when I am gone, I do not want you to sing at the big funeral. I do not want cameras. I do not want Hollywood people." Her voice was barely a whisper. "I want you to sing Ave Maria for me in our church, with our people. That is where I want to hear you from heaven." Dean had promised. Of course he promised. He would have promised her anything. On the morning of June 25th, before the official public funeral, a small group gathered inside St. Anthony's. There was Dean, his father Guy, his brothers and sisters, a handful of old family friends, and the church choir, 8 elderly Italian women who had sung beside Angela for decades. Dean walked into that church looking like a ghost. He was wearing a dark suit, but his face was pale. His eyes were empty. He moved slowly, like a man walking underwater. Father Antonio Benedetti, the old priest who had baptized Dean as a baby, approached him gently. "Dino," the priest said softly, "you do not have to do this. Your mother knows how much you love her. You do not have to prove anything." Dean looked at the priest, and for the first time in 2 days, something flickered in his eyes. Not hope, not peace. Something closer to desperation. "I promised her, Father. I have to try." The priest nodded slowly. He understood. Promises made to dying mothers are sacred, even when keeping them might break you. If you are still watching, drop a comment below and tell me where in the world you are right now. Because what happened next in that little church is something I will never forget telling you. Dean walked to the front of the church. He stood before his mother's casket. The choir gathered behind him. The church fell completely silent. And then Dean opened his mouth to sing, "Ave Maria, Grazia Plena." Dean's voice floated through the small church, soft and fragile. This was not the smooth, confident voice that filled concert halls. This was not the voice that made women swoon and men jealous. This was something raw, something broken, something real. "Maria, Grazia Plena." Behind him, the old Italian women in the choir began to hum softly. They were not performing. They were praying. They were holding him up with their voices, letting him know he was not alone. Dean made it through the first verse. His voice trembled, but he kept going. His eyes were fixed on his mother's casket. His hands were clasped together so tightly his knuckles had turned white. "Ave, Ave Dominus." And then it happened. On the high note of the second verse, Dean's voice cracked completely. Not a small waver, not a tiny slip, a complete break, like a glass shattering on a stone floor. He tried to push through. He opened his mouth to keep singing, but nothing came out. His throat had closed up. Tears began streaming down his face. The king of cool, the man who never let anyone see him sweat, was falling apart in front of everyone. Dean stopped singing. He just stood there frozen, staring at his mother's casket, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. He could not finish. He could not keep his promise. The church was completely silent. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Everyone was watching this man, this legend, break into pieces right before their eyes. And nobody knew what to do. Then something beautiful happened. From behind Dean, a single voice rose up. It was Maria Costello, the oldest woman in the choir. She was 83 years old. She had sung beside Angela Crocetti for over 30 years. And without hesitation, without waiting for permission, she began to sing the next line of Ave Maria. Dominus tecum. One by one, the other women in the choir joined her. Their voices blended together, filling the church with a sound that was more than music. It was love. It was grief. It was a community refusing to let one of their own suffer alone. The sound wrapped around Dean like a warm blanket. These women, these old Italian immigrants who had known his mother, who had watched him grow up, who had prayed for him when he left for Hollywood, they were finishing the song he could not finish. They were keeping the promise he could not keep. And something inside Dean broke open. Not broke down. Broke open. He began to cry in a way he had not cried since he was a child. Deep, wrenching sobs that shook his whole body. All the pain he had been holding inside for days came pouring out. Maria Costello stepped forward. She put her arms around Dean from behind, still singing. Then another woman moved closer. then another. Soon Dean was surrounded by these elderly women, these mothers and grandmothers who understood that grief does not care about fame or money or how many records you have sold. Grief only understands love, and love was the only thing that could carry Dean through this moment. One of the women leaned close to his ear and whispered in Italian, "Questo è quello che fa la famiglia. Cantiamo per te quando non puoi cantare per te stesso." This is what family does. We sing for you when you cannot sing for yourself. Dean could not speak. He just nodded and let these women he had known his whole life hold him while he wept. But the moment was not over yet. Dean slowly pulled away from the embrace. His face was wet with tears. His chest was still heaving. But something in his eyes had changed. The emptiness was still there, but now there was something else. Gratitude. And maybe, just maybe, a small piece of peace. He walked to his mother's casket. The choir fell silent, watching him. Dean placed both hands on the polished wood. He leaned down and pressed his forehead against the casket, like a child resting his head on his mother's chest. His tears fell onto the surface, small dark spots on the shining wood. And then, in a voice so quiet that only those closest to him could hear, Dean whispered something to his mother. The exact words have never been confirmed, but Maria Costello, who was standing just a few feet away, later said she heard him say, "Mama, they sang for us, just like you wanted. La tua gente, your people, they carried me." Dean stayed there for a long moment, his hands on the casket, his eyes closed. The church was so silent, you could hear the candles flickering. Then he did something that surprised everyone. He stood up straight. He wiped his face with the back of his hand, and he turned to face the choir. "Will you sing it again for her?" His voice was rough from crying, but clear enough to understand. The whole thing. One more time, so she can hear it in heaven. The women did not hesitate. They looked at each other, nodded, and began to sing Ave Maria from the beginning. But this time, they were not singing to support Dean. They were singing directly to Angela, like they were serenading her soul into paradise. Dean did not try to join them. He just stood there with his hand on his mother's casket, letting their voices wash over him, letting the music fill the cracks in his broken heart. When the last note faded away, Dean walked to each woman in the choir and hugged her. One by one, he could not find words to thank them, but they understood. Some things are too big for words. Before he left the church that morning, Dean pulled Father Benedetti aside. He pressed an envelope into the priest's hand. "For the church," Dean said quietly, "whatever it needs. Forever. You call me." The priest nodded. He understood that this was not about money. This was Dean trying to repay a debt that could never be repaid, trying to thank people who had given him something that all his fame and fortune could never buy. The story of what happened in that church was kept quiet for many years. There were no reporters. There were no cameras. It was too sacred, too private, too real. But those who were there that morning never forgot it. If this story is touching your heart, hit that subscribe button right now and leave a comment telling me where you are watching from. Because what those choir members revealed years later will stay with you forever. In the years that followed, several of the choir members were interviewed about that morning. Their stories were remarkably consistent. They all remembered Dean's voice breaking. They all remembered the moment Maria Costello started singing. And they all remembered the feeling inside that church, a feeling they described as pure, overwhelming love. He was just a boy who lost his mama. Maria Costello said in an interview before she passed away in 1981. Did not matter that he was Dean Martin. Did not matter that he was famous. Grief does not care about your name. He needed to be held. He needed to be reminded that he was not alone. That is all any of us need when we are hurting. For Dean, the loss of his mother was a wound that never fully healed. Friends said he talked about Angela for the rest of his life, always with tears in his eyes, always with that same pain in his voice. He never got over it. Some people said he spent the rest of his life trying to fill the hole she left behind. But something changed in Dean after that morning in the church. His relationship with music became deeper, more personal. When he sang certain songs, especially the old Italian ballads his mother loved, he would sometimes get emotional in ways he never had before. and those who knew him understood why. He was remembering that morning. He was remembering the voices that had carried him when he could not carry himself. When Maria Costello passed away in 1981, her family found something tucked inside her Bible. It was a handwritten letter from Dean Martin, sent just a few months after the funeral. The letter read, "Dear Maria, I have sung in front of millions of people, but I have never felt music the way I felt it that morning in our little church. You showed me what grace really means, what family really means. I will never forget what you did for me and for my mother. With love, Dino." Maria had kept that letter for 15 years. She never showed it to anyone. It was too precious, too sacred. Today, St. Anthony of Padua Church still stands on the south side of Steubenville. It has gone through many changes over the years. The neighborhood has changed. The congregation has changed. But the old stone walls are still there. The same walls that heard Dean Martin's voice crack. The same walls that heard those 8 Italian women rise up and carry him through. There's no plaque. There's no memorial marker. Nothing to tell visitors what happened there on that June morning in 1966. It remains a private moment, a sacred memory passed down through stories from those who were there to those who came after. But for those who know the story, that little church represents something profound about Dean Martin. It represents the man behind the legend, the son who loved his mother so much that losing her nearly broke him. And it represents something even bigger, the power of community, the way a group of ordinary people saw a broken man and used their voices to help put him back together. The promise Dean made to his mother was both kept and broken that day. He could not finish the song himself. His grief was too heavy. But in a way, that made the promise even more beautiful, because it showed that keeping promises does not always mean doing things alone. Sometimes it means accepting help. Sometimes it means letting others carry you when your legs give out. And sometimes, when your voice breaks, the most beautiful thing that can happen is for other voices to rise up and finish your song. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button and share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. Have you ever experienced a moment when others carried you through something you could not face alone? Tell me your story in the comments. And do not forget to ring that notification bell so you never miss another untold story about the human moments behind the legends we love. Where are you watching from right now? Drop your city and country below. I read every single comment. Until next time.